At my daughter's wedding, a janitor grabbed my arm and whispered, "If you value your life, Hyde, please trust me." I almost brushed her off until I saw the fear in her eyes. She led me to a storage closet behind the reception hall, and exactly 10 minutes later, what I overheard made my hands go numb. My son-in-law was talking to my niece, and the words coming out of his mouth told me one thing: this wedding wasn't about love. It was a trap, and my daughter was the target. I'm so glad you're here with me. Stay with my story until the very end and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Your presence truly matters to me. And just a quick note, some parts of this story include fictional elements created for storytelling and reflection, with details adjusted to highlight the lessons it carries. I woke up that Saturday morning the way I'd woken up every morning for the last 5 years. Alone in a bed built for two. The sunlight filtered through the curtains of the Mitchell Estate master bedroom, painting soft gold across the empty pillow beside me. Robert's pillow. For the first year after he died, I used to reach for him in those drowsy seconds before memory caught up. My hand would find cold sheets instead of warm skin, and the day would begin with a small, quiet heartbreak. 5 years later, I'd stopped reaching, but I hadn't stopped noticing the emptiness. Robert Mitchell died of pancreatic cancer. 8 months from diagnosis to goodbye. That's what they don't tell you about that particular disease. It doesn't give you time to prepare. It gives you just enough time to watch someone you love disappear piece by piece, day by day, until one Tuesday afternoon, a nurse touches your shoulder and says, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell. He's gone." But today wasn't about loss. Today was about Michelle. I pushed myself up and walked to the window. The estate grounds stretched out below me like a painting, manicured lawns glowing in the early California sun, white tent canopies already in place, chairs lined up in perfect rows on either side of the aisle. 300 white roses, ivory ribbons catching the breeze. Everything ready, everything perfect. She would have loved this. Robert would have been up since dawn, checking every detail with that quiet intensity of his. He'd have retied the ribbons because they weren't symmetrical enough. He'd have tested every chair to make sure none wobbled. And then he'd have sat in the kitchen with his coffee, crying happy tears he'd pretend were allergies, and he'd have said, "Our little girl Ash, can you believe it?" He would have made Michelle feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. He would have held her hand through every nervous moment. Instead, it was just me. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and made a promise. Standing there in that golden morning light, looking down at the grounds where my daughter would become someone's wife, I whispered the words aloud. "I'll protect her, Robert, the way you would have wanted me to." I didn't know then how much that promise would cost. I should tell you something about myself because it matters for what comes later. I'm not the kind of wealthy woman you see in movies. I didn't inherit money. I didn't marry into it. I built it. 42 years ago, I was a 20-year-old girl from a middle-class family in Sacramento with a business degree from a state college and more ambition than common sense. I started Mitchell Construction with a $12,000 loan, a used pickup truck, and a willingness to outwork everyone in the room. Robert was a structural engineer I hired for my third project. He showed up in steel-toed boots and a flannel shirt, told me my foundation plans were wrong, and then spent the next 3 hours showing me how to fix them. I fell in love with him somewhere between the rebar calculations and the coffee he brought me without asking. We built the company together, literally. Side by side on construction sites covered in concrete dust, arguing about load-bearing walls and kissing in half-finished kitchens. Mitchell Construction became Mitchell Holdings Real Estate Development Commercial Properties. $47 million in assets by the time Robert got sick. After he died, I ran it alone. Not because I wanted to, because our daughter needed to see that a woman could stand in the wreckage of her life and keep building. Michelle was everything we'd ever hoped for. Smart, kind, stubborn in the way that meant she'd never let anyone push her around, or so I thought. She'd been raised watching her parents build something from nothing, and I always believed she'd inherited our ability to see through people. I was wrong about that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. By 10 o'clock, the house was alive with motion. Michelle's bridesmaids filled the East Wing with laughter and champagne. I could hear them from downstairs, high, bright voices bouncing off the walls, the kind of sound that makes a house feel young again. I stood at the bottom of the stairs listening, and for just a moment, it was 15 years ago. Michelle was having a sleepover. Her friends were giggling about boys. Robert was pretending to be annoyed about the noise while secretly loving every second of it. I climbed the stairs and knocked on her door. "Come in, Mom." I stepped inside and the world stopped. Michelle stood in front of the full-length mirror in her wedding dress, a cascade of ivory lace and silk that caught the morning light like water flowing over stone. Her dark hair was swept up delicate and elegant, and when she turned to look at me, her eyes were bright with tears she was trying not to shed. "Mom," she whispered, "what do you think?" I couldn't speak. All I could see was the 5-year-old who used to stand on my shoes while we danced in the living room, her tiny hands gripping my fingers, her head barely reaching my waist. The 12-year-old who came home grass-stained and grinning after scoring the winning goal. The teenager who cried on my shoulder for 3 hours after her first heartbreak. The young woman who called me from college at midnight just to hear my voice. And now this beautiful grown woman in a wedding dress looking at me like I still had all the answers. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I finally said. My voice cracked on the last word. "Your father would be so proud." She crossed the room in 3 steps and hugged me so tight I could feel her heartbeat against mine. I held her the way I used to when she was small, one hand on her back, one hand cradling her head, and I wished with everything in me that I could freeze this moment forever. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." I kissed the top of her head and stepped back before the tears could come. I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry until the ceremony. "Let's get you married." Harper appeared from the bathroom adjusting Michelle's veil. "I need to tell you about Harper because you need to understand what she meant to us before you can understand what she did." Harper Reed was my niece, my brother Douglas's daughter, 27 years old, bright pretty with the kind of energy that filled every room she walked into. She'd grown up alongside Michelle. Not like cousins, like sisters. Every weekend when they were little, Harper was at our house. Every holiday, every birthday, every summer vacation. Robert used to joke that we had 2 daughters, one we'd made and one we'd borrowed. I taught Harper to ride a bike in our driveway. I took her to her first baseball game. When Douglas and Brenda went through their rough patch and Harper needed somewhere safe, she slept in Michelle's room for 3 months. In Michelle's bed, whispering secrets until 2 in the morning. They were inseparable. So when Michelle asked Harper to be her maid of honor, it wasn't even a question. It was assumed, like asking the sun to rise. "Aunt Ashley, doesn't she look incredible?" Harper said, stepping back to admire her work on the veil. "She does." Harper hugged me. "I'm so happy for her," she said. But as she pulled away, I noticed something. Her eyes were slightly red, her smile tight at the edges, like someone holding themselves together with effort. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked. "You look a little stressed." "Just emotional," Harper said quickly. Too quickly. She waved her hand and laughed. "You know me. I cry at everything." She turned away before I could say more, busying herself with the train of Michelle's dress. I let it go. People get emotional at weddings. It didn't mean anything. At least that's what I told myself. St. Mary's Cathedral was everything Michelle had dreamed of. Soaring ceilings that made you feel small in the best way. Stained glass windows throwing jewels of colored light across the pews, ruby sapphire gold. 200 guests in their finest turning in their seats as the organ swelled with the first notes of the processional. I stood at the entrance of the aisle with my daughter's arm linked through mine, and I felt every eye in the room land on us. But I only saw one person, Ethan Graves. He stood at the altar in a sharp black tuxedo, hands clasped in front of him, watching Michelle walk toward him with what looked like complete consuming adoration. His jaw was tight with emotion. His eyes glistened. Handsome, polished, successful. Everything a mother could want for her daughter. So why did I feel that small, nagging tug of unease? It wasn't anything I could name. Not then. It was more like a stone in my shoe, small enough to ignore, persistent enough that you couldn't quite forget it was there. A feeling that something was slightly off-center, like a picture frame hanging 1 degree crooked on a wall. "Stop it," I told myself. "You're just nervous. Every mother feels this way. No one is ever good enough for your daughter." I'd met Ethan Graves 18 months ago when Michelle brought him home for dinner. He was 35, classically handsome, strong jaw, blue-gray eyes, the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He introduced himself as an independent financial advisor with high-net-worth clients, shook my hand with exactly the right amount of firmness, and complimented the pot roast without being sycophantic. He was charming. Effortlessly charming. The kind of charm that felt natural, organic, like he wasn't trying at all. But here's the thing about being a woman who built a $47 million company from a pickup truck, and alone you learn to read people. Not perfectly, not always, but you develop an instinct for when someone is performing versus when someone is real. And there was something about Ethan Graves that felt performed. I never said anything. Because what would I say, Michelle, I don't trust your boyfriend because he's too perfect? She'd have laughed at me. And she'd have been right to laugh. It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. We reached the altar. Father David Thornton smiled warmly. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? I looked at Michelle one last time. She was glowing, radiant, happy in a way I hadn't seen since Robert died. I do, I said. I placed her hand in Ethan's. I felt his fingers close around hers, confident, possessive. I stepped back, and I watched my daughter become someone else's responsibility. The ceremony blurred after that. Vows, rings, the kiss that made 200 people applaud. I clapped along with everyone else, smiling the way I was supposed to smile, feeling the strange, bittersweet cocktail of pride and loss that every parent feels when they let go. But the stone in my shoe didn't go away. The reception at the waterfront venue was perfect. String lights hung from the ceiling like captured stars. The tables were dressed in white linen and gold accents, each centerpiece a small garden of roses and eucalyptus. A live band played soft jazz as guests filled the space with laughter, conversation, and the musical clinking of champagne glasses. Michelle and Ethan moved through the crowd like they'd been doing this their whole lives, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, leaning into each other with the easy intimacy of a couple that belonged together. They looked every inch the golden couple. I watched them take the floor for their first dance. The band shifted into a slow, sweet melody I didn't recognize, and Ethan pulled Michelle close. She rested her head on his shoulder. He whispered something into her hair, and she laughed, that real laugh, the one that came from deep in her chest, the one I hadn't heard in years. The room watched in silence, captivated. Something loosened in my chest. Maybe I was wrong, I thought. Maybe everything really is going to be okay. Maybe the stone in my shoe is just a pebble, and I'm making it into a boulder because I'm scared of being alone. She looks happy. I turned. Will Dawson stood beside me holding 2 glasses of bourbon. He handed me one without asking. Will had been my best friend for 30 years, my lawyer, my advisor, the person Robert trusted most in the world besides me. He was 64, silver-haired, with the kind of steady, weathered face that made you feel safe just looking at it. She does, I said. You did good, Ashley. I nodded, but I didn't answer, because the stone was still there. Quiet, persistent, like something waiting. Will clinked his glass against mine. To Michelle. To Michelle. We drank in silence, and I tried to let the moment be enough. But it wasn't. Because as I stood there watching the dance floor, I saw something. A small thing. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking, if you weren't a woman who'd spent 42 years reading people across boardroom tables and construction sites. Ethan's eyes. When he thought no one was watching, and he thought no one was watching because Michelle's head was on his shoulder, and the room was looking at them like a painting, his eyes moved. Not the way a groom's eyes move drifting happily around a room full of friends and family. His eyes moved the way a businessman's eyes move when he's sizing up a deal. Scanning, assessing, calculating. They stopped on me for 1 second. 1 second too long. Then Michelle lifted her head and the look vanished, replaced instantly by adoration, by warmth, by everything a bride wanted to see in her husband's eyes. I took a long drink of bourbon and told myself I'd imagined it. I hadn't imagined An hour later, I found myself on the venue's rooftop terrace. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to stop analyzing every glance Ethan gave my daughter and every word he spoke. The city lights stretched out below me, distant and indifferent. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes. The breeze off the water was cool against my skin. I could hear the muffled music from below the base vibrating through the building's bones, laughter rising and falling like waves. Up here it all felt far away, like someone else's party. Mrs. Mitchell, I turned. A woman stood a few feet away, middle-aged, maybe late 40s, wearing the venue's cleaning staff uniform, dark pants, dark polo shirt with the venue's logo. She held a spray bottle in one hand and a rag in the other. I recognized her vaguely from earlier in the evening. She'd been clearing tables, collecting plates, moving through the crowd the way cleaning staff always move quietly, efficiently, invisibly. People don't notice the people who clean up after them. That's the thing. They walk right past them like they're furniture. But the people who clean, they notice everything. Because when you're invisible, you have nothing to do but watch. "Can I help you?" I asked. She glanced over her shoulder. Then she stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the lines around her eyes, the calluses on her hands, the way her jaw was set with something that looked very much like determination. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said again. Her voice was low, urgent. "I need you to trust me right now." I frowned. "What's this about?" She looked at me with eyes that were steady and serious, dark brown, unflinching. The eyes of someone who had made a decision and wasn't going to unmake it. "It's about your daughter," she said, "and the man she just married." My stomach dropped. It was like someone had reached inside my chest and pulled the floor out from under my heart. "What are you talking about?" "I don't have much time," she said quickly. "But I've been watching something all evening. Something you need to see for yourself." "Who are you?" "My name is Nina Reeves. I've worked here for 10 years. I've seen a lot of things at a lot of events, things people do when they think the staff isn't watching. And tonight I've seen something that scared me enough to come find you." I stared at her. My heart was picking up speed, beating harder with each second. The stone in my shoe had suddenly become a boulder. "What did you see?" Nina shook her head. "I can't just tell you. You won't believe me, a stranger, a janitor making accusations at your daughter's wedding. You need to hear it for yourself. They're down there right now. If we hurry, you'll hear them. They, your son-in-law, and the young woman who was standing beside your daughter at the altar." Harper. The world tilted slightly, like the ground had shifted 1 inch to the left. "Follow me," Nina said. "Please." Every reasonable part of my brain said no. This was absurd. I was hiding from my daughter's reception to follow a janitor into the bowels of a building based on nothing but a vague warning. This was paranoia. This was a stressed-out mother reading shadows where there was only darkness. But then I looked at Nina Reeves, really looked at her, and I saw something I recognized. Not fear, not craziness, not a woman looking for attention or drama. I saw a mother who had seen something that scared her, and who was doing the brave, uncomfortable thing because she'd want someone to do the same for her. "Lead the way," I said. Nina moved fast. She led me through the rooftop door and down a back stairwell I hadn't known existed. The polished marble and warm lighting of the reception disappeared, replaced by industrial concrete exposed pipes and the hum of air conditioning units. This was the building's skeleton, the part guests were never supposed to see. The music faded with each flight of stairs. By the time we reached the service corridor on the ground level, it was just a distant heartbeat through the walls. The corridor was narrow, lined with storage closets and supply racks. Cleaning products stacked chairs, boxes of napkins and tablecloths. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, giving everything a pale, sickly glow. Nina stopped in front of a narrow door and opened it. Inside was a storage closet, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, crowded with mops, brooms, bottles of industrial cleaner. She pulled me in and closed the door behind us. The space was dim. The only light came from a thin strip under the door and a sliver where the door didn't quite meet the frame, a gap about 1/2 inch wide that gave a narrow view of the hallway outside. "Stay quiet," Nina whispered. "Don't make a sound." "This is, please." Her voice was barely audible. "They were here 5 minutes ago. They'll come back. They always come back to this hallway. It's the only place in the building without cameras." Without cameras. That detail hit me like cold water. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure Nina could hear it. I pressed my back against the wall between a mop bucket and a shelf of bleach bottles, and I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The muffled bass of the reception throbbed through the walls like a distant pulse. 3 minutes. I was about to say this was a mistake. I was about to push open the door and go back upstairs and pour myself another bourbon and forget this ever happened. Then I heard footsteps and voices. "I still can't believe you pulled it off." A woman's voice. Young, familiar in the way that made my blood crystallize in my veins. Harper. "It wasn't that hard." A man's voice. Smooth, confident. The voice I'd heard say wedding vows an hour ago. Ethan. The world didn't tilt this time. It cracked. Nina glanced back at me. Her expression was grave. She pressed a finger to her lips. I didn't need the reminder. I couldn't have spoken if I'd tried. My throat had closed. My hands were trembling so badly I pressed them flat against the wall to keep them still. Through the crack in the door I could see them. Not clearly just shapes in the dim hallway standing close together. Too close, but close enough to see Ethan's hand resting on Harper's waist. Close enough to see the way she leaned into him, her shoulder against his chest. It wasn't familial. It wasn't innocent. It was intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. "Everything on track?" Harper asked quietly. "Perfect," Ethan said. "Trust fund unlocks tomorrow morning. Insurance has had my name since February. The old lady doesn't suspect a thing." The old lady. He was talking about me. I pressed harder against the wall. My knees were softening. The mop bucket behind me shifted slightly and Nina's hand shot out to steady it without a sound. "And if she starts asking questions," Harper said, "she won't. She's 62, living alone lonely. She wants Michelle to be happy so badly she'll believe anything that lets her keep believing." A pause. "That's her weakness. She loves too much. She loves too much." He said it the way you'd describe a flaw in a business plan, a vulnerability to exploit. "What about Michelle?" Harper asked. The silence that followed was the longest 3 seconds of my life. "Michelle serves her purpose," Ethan said finally. "For now. And when she doesn't, then we move to the next phase, like we discussed." Harper's voice dropped even lower. "That's a lot of money, Ethan. 10 million in life insurance alone. The trust fund. The company shares." "Which is exactly why we're patient," Ethan said. 6 months. Maybe less if things go smoothly. I saw him pull her closer. Saw him press a kiss to her forehead. Tender practice like they'd done it 1,000 times. Like she wasn't my niece. Like Michelle wasn't her cousin. Like this hallway wasn't 50 feet from a room full of people celebrating a marriage that was nothing but a business transaction. "Trust me," he murmured. "Everything is going exactly according to plan." "Promise, promise." Harper pulled back and smoothed the front of her bridesmaid dress. The same lavender dress Michelle had helped her pick out 3 months ago. They'd spent an entire Saturday going from boutique to boutique, trying on dresses and laughing until their stomachs hurt. Michelle had been so happy that day. "I should get back before someone notices I'm gone," Harper said. "Go ahead. I'll follow in a minute." She kissed him once, quick, deliberate, and then walked away down the hallway. Her heels clicked against the tile, getting quieter and quieter until they disappeared. Ethan stood alone for a moment. He reached up and adjusted his tie, checking his reflection in a decorative mirror mounted on the wall. He ran a hand through his hair, straightened his lapels, and then he smiled at himself. Not the warm smile he'd given Michelle at the altar. Not the charming smile he'd used on me. This was a different smile entirely. Private, satisfied. The smile of a man looking at his own reflection and liking what he saw because everything was going exactly as he'd designed it. Then he turned and walked away, whistling softly. A tune I didn't recognize. Something light and careless. I didn't move. I couldn't. The hallway was empty. Silent. Just the hum of machines and the ghost of Ethan's whistle fading into nothing. Nina slowly, carefully closed the door the rest of the way. She turned to face me in the dim light. Her expression held no surprise, only sadness. The sadness of someone who'd known what I was going to hear and wished she'd been wrong. "Now do you believe me?" she whispered. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My brain was still trying to process the words, still trying to rearrange them into something that made sense, something that wasn't what they obviously were. Michelle serves her purpose. For now. Move to the next phase. 10 million in life insurance. The old lady doesn't suspect a thing. And Harper, my brother's daughter, the girl who used to sit on my lap and beg me to read one more story, the teenager who called me crying when her parents were fighting and I drove 45 minutes in the rain to pick her up, the young woman who stood beside my daughter at the altar 2 hours ago holding her flowers, smiling her beautiful smile, acting like Mrs. Mitchell. Nina's voice cut through the fog, firm, grounding. "Are you okay?" "No," I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Distant. Hollow. "No, I'm not okay." She stepped closer. "I'm sorry you had to hear that, but you needed to know." "How long?" I tried to steady my voice. Failed. "How long have you been watching them?" "All evening," Nina said. I noticed them early, the way he looks at her when no one's paying attention, the way they disappear at the same time and come back separately, always a few minutes apart. I've worked events for 10 years, Mrs. Mitchell. Weddings, galas, corporate parties. You see a lot when people treat you like furniture. She reached into the pocket of her uniform pants and pulled out a small slip of paper. She pressed it into my hand. My number, she said. If you ever need anything, a witness, a statement, you call me. I'll tell anyone what I saw tonight. I stared at the paper. My fingers were trembling so badly the numbers blurred. Why? I whispered. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Nina's face softened. For the first time, I saw past the uniform, past the spray bottle, and the rag, past the invisibility that her job imposed on her. I saw a woman, a mother, someone who understood exactly what it meant to fear for your child. Because I have a daughter too, she said simply. She's 23. And if someone knew she was in danger, if a stranger saw something and could have warned me but didn't, I would never forgive them. She paused. And I would never forgive myself. I nodded slowly, slipped the paper into my clutch. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, Nina said. Her voice hardened slightly. Men like your son-in-law, they don't give up easy. And if your niece is helping him... I know, I said quietly. It means he's thought this through. Nina opened the door and checked the hallway. Empty. Go back to the reception, she said. Act normal. Smile. Dance. Don't let him see anything different in your eyes. And then what? She looked at me. Then you figure out how to protect your daughter. She slipped out of the room and disappeared down the corridor back to her job, back to clearing plates and wiping tables, back to being invisible. Leaving me alone in a storage closet surrounded by mop buckets and bleach, listening to the muffled sound of my daughter's wedding reception happening above me like a dream I'd just woken up from. 10 minutes ago, I'd been watching Michelle dance with her husband. Now I was hiding in the dark, trying to process the fact that her husband had just called her useful for now. That my niece had kissed him in a hallway without cameras. That somewhere in the last 18 months, while I'd been choosing flower arrangements and writing checks and feeling proud, a trap had been built around my daughter brick by careful brick. And I'd helped build it. I don't know how long I stood in that closet. 2 minutes. 5. Long enough for my hands to stop shaking. Long enough for the shock to settle into something harder, something colder, the kind of clarity that comes when all the possibilities narrow down to one. I had to go back. I smoothed my dress, wiped my eyes, checked my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. The woman looking back at me was pale, her pupils too large, her jaw too tight. But she was standing. She was breathing. She could do this. I slipped out of the closet, climbed the service stairs, and re-entered the reception through a side door near the bar. The band was still playing. The lights were still warm. Nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. Ashley? There you are. Ethan was walking toward me. That smile. That effortless, beautiful, practiced smile that I'd spent 18 months trying to trust. You okay? He said. You look a little pale. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Blue-gray. Clear, concerned. He was good. God, he was good. If I hadn't heard him in that hallway, I would have believed every pixel of that concern. Just emotional, I said, he said. You know how it is? He laughed. Warm. Easy. I get it. Big day. He put his hand on my shoulder, the same hand that had rested on Harper's waist 20 minutes ago, and squeezed gently. Michelle's lucky to have a mom like you. I'm the lucky one, I managed. I want you to know something, Ashley. He leaned in slightly, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive, something chosen specifically to make you feel like you were in the presence of someone who had their life figured out. I'm going to take care of her, whatever she needs, whatever you need. We're family now. Family. The word hit me like a fist wrapped in velvet. I'm glad to hear that, I said, and I smiled, the hardest smile of my life. Good, Ethan said, because I was hoping we could sit down next week, talk about some business ideas, succession planning. I have some thoughts that might interest you. Succession planning, life insurance, $10 million. Sure, I said. We can talk. Perfect. He squeezed my shoulder one more time and walked away, moving through the crowd with the easy grace of a man who owned every room he entered. I stood still. My champagne glass was empty. My hand was shaking around the stem. Ashley! Will appeared at my elbow with 2 fresh bourbons. You look like you need this more than I do. I took the glass and drank half of it in one swallow. The burn was grounding. Real. I needed something real. Will studied my face. 30 years of friendship meant he could read me better than anyone alive. What's going on? Nothing. Don't do that. Something happened. Your face is gray. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to grab his arm and drag him to a quiet corner and pour every word I'd heard in that hallway into his steady, reliable ears. But Nina's voice echoed in my head. Don't let him see anything different. Long day, I said. Will didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But he was Will he didn't push. He just stayed beside me. A quiet, solid presence. The kind of person who doesn't need to fill silence because they know sometimes silence is what you need. An hour later, Michelle found me. She appeared out of the crowd like sunshine breaking through clouds, flushed and happy, and so breathtakingly alive that it physically hurt to look at her. Mom, I've been looking for you everywhere. She threw her arms around me and I held on. Tight. Too tight, probably. She pulled back slightly and looked at my face. Are you okay? You seem off? I'm fine, I said. Just overwhelmed. Happy overwhelmed. She searched my eyes for a moment. Then she smiled that wide, unguarded smile that had been melting my heart since she was 6 months old. Thank you, Mom, she said, for everything. For walking me down the aisle. For this beautiful reception. For being you. She squeezed my hands. I know it hasn't been easy without Dad. I know today was hard. But I need you to know I'm happy. Really, really happy. My chest tightened so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Michelle serves her purpose. For now. I wanted to tell her. The words were right there pressing against my teeth, clawing at my throat. I wanted to grab her hand and run out the door into the night away from Ethan Graves and his blue-gray eyes and his perfect smile and his plans. But I couldn't. Not without proof. If I told her now with nothing but the word of a janitor and a conversation I'd overheard in a storage closet, she wouldn't believe me. She'd think I was paranoid, jealous, unable to let go. Ethan would deny everything. Harper would back him up. And I'd lose my daughter forever. So I swallowed the words, pushed them down deep where they sat in my stomach like stones. Be happy, sweetheart, I whispered. That's all I've ever wanted. I am, she said. I really am. She kissed my cheek and disappeared back into the crowd. Back to Ethan. Back to the man who was already planning what would happen when she stopped being useful. The reception ended just after 11. Guests filed out slowly, exchanging hugs and promises to get together soon. The band packed up their instruments. The caterers began clearing tables. The night wound down the way all parties do gradually, then all at once. Michelle and Ethan stood near the entrance, thanking everyone. Perfect posture, perfect smiles, perfect couple. I watched from a distance as they climbed into the hired car, a sleek black sedan with white ribbons tied to the mirrors and a just married sign taped to the trunk. Michelle waved through the window, beaming, radiant, so happy it hurt to look at. I waved back. The car pulled away. The taillights glowed red, then orange, then disappeared around the corner. And my daughter was gone, driving into the night with a man who saw her as a line item on a balance sheet. I sat in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour after everyone left. The venue lights went dark. The cleaning crew, Nina among them somewhere, finished their work and went home. The lot emptied until it was just me and the silence and the faint smell of the ocean drifting through the cracked window. My phone glowed on the passenger seat. The lock screen showed a photo of Michelle and me from 2 weeks ago, laughing about something I couldn't remember now. Her head was thrown back, mouth open, joy pouring out of her like light. I picked up the phone, opened my contacts, scrolled until I found the name. Will Dawson. My thumb hovered over the call button. Then I closed the app. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight I would go home. I would sit in the quiet. I would think. And tomorrow I would begin. Because the woman who built a $47 million company from a pickup truck and a loan didn't panic. She didn't crumble. She didn't run. She planned. And then she fought. The house was too quiet. I stood in the foyer of the Mitchell estate just after midnight, keys still in my hand, staring at nothing. The drive home was a blur, headlights and highway lines, and the echo of Ethan's voice saying, "She loves too much," like it was a diagnosis. I dropped my keys on the entry table and walked upstairs, past Michelle's old bedroom, past the guest room where Harper used to sleep during her weekend visits, past the bathroom where I'd found Robert collapsed 2 weeks before the diagnosis sitting on the tile floor saying, "I'm fine, Ash, just dizzy. I'm fine." He wasn't fine, and neither was I. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's hand on Harper's waist, heard his voice. Michelle serves her purpose. For now. At 2 in the morning, I gave up and went to my study. The room was lined with framed photographs, decades of memories in glass and wood. I turned on the desk lamp and let my eyes wander. Michelle at 5, holding a fishing rod twice her size, grinning at the camera with a gap where her front teeth used to be. Michelle at 12, grass-stained in her soccer uniform, holding a trophy almost as big as her head. Michelle at 18, graduation cap crooked on her head, Robert's arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something the photographer said. Robert would have known. He always knew when something was wrong. He had instincts I could read people the way I read blueprints and contracts. If he'd been at that wedding, he would have seen through Ethan Graves in the first 5 minutes. But he wasn't here. And I'd missed every warning sign because I was too busy being grateful that my daughter had found someone. I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop. The screen's glow was harsh in the darkness. I started typing. Not a document, not an email, just a list. A list of everything I should have seen. The questions about my business innocent at first, then increasingly specific. How is the company structured, Ashley? Who would take over if something happened to you? Has Michelle shown interest in running things? The interest in estate planning. 6 months ago, Ethan sitting across from me at this very desk, so earnest, so responsible. I just want to make sure Michelle is protected. Have you updated your insurance policies? And my answer, my stupid, trusting answer, 10 million. That should cover everything. The smile on his face when I'd said that number. I thought it was relief. Now I knew it was victory. The fast engagement. 3 months of dating, then a ring. I'd worried. I'd said, "Isn't this a little quick?" And Michelle had looked at me with Robert's eyes and said, "When you know, Mom. Isn't that what you always said about Dad?" What could I say to that Harper? Always around during the wedding planning. Always helping. Always available. I'd thought she was being a good cousin, a good friend, a good sister. Now I knew she'd been positioning herself, watching, reporting, making sure the trap stayed hidden. Every piece had been there. Every red flag waving right in front of my face. And I'd missed all of them because I wanted my daughter to be happy, because I was tired of being alone, because the alternative that someone could be cruel enough to weaponize love was too terrible to consider. At 3 in the morning, I closed the laptop. At 4, I watched the sky begin to lighten through the study window. At 5, I stood up and walked to the kitchen, made coffee. Robert's Blend dark roast, 2 sugars strong enough to strip paint. I sat at the island and watched the sunrise pour gold across the estate grounds. The same grounds where Michelle had learned to ride a bike, where we'd hosted her graduation party, where yesterday morning, standing at the bedroom window, I'd promised Robert I would protect her. I'd failed to see the danger coming. I'd been blind, trusting naive. But I saw it now. And now that I saw it, I was going to fight it with everything I had. Every dollar, every connection, every ounce of strength left in this 62-year-old body. Ethan Graves had made one critical mistake. He'd looked at a grieving widow and seen an easy target. He'd looked at a mother's love and seen a weakness to exploit. He had no idea what a mother's love actually was. I picked up my phone. 8:00 a.m. exactly. 3 calls. 3 calls to start a war. The first call was to Thomas Barrett. Thomas had been my estate attorney for 20 years. He'd drawn up every trust, every policy, every succession document the Mitchell family had ever signed. If anyone could tell me exactly how deep the hole I'd dug for my daughter was, it was Thomas. He picked up on the second ring. "Ashley, congratulations on the wedding. Michelle must be—" "Thomas, I need to see you today. It's urgent." A pause. The kind of pause where you can hear someone recalibrating. "What's going on?" "I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me at your office in an hour?" "Of course, I'll clear my schedule." "Thank you." The second call was to Will Dawson. "Will, it's Ashley. It's 8 in the morning on a Sunday. You never call this early unless something's wrong." Something is very wrong. Meet me at Thomas Barrett's office at 9. Ashley. It's about Ethan and everything I heard last night. Silence. Then, I'll be there in 40 minutes. The third call was the hardest, not because of who I was calling, but because of what it meant. Making this call meant admitting to myself that the situation was real, that I wasn't paranoid, wasn't overreacting, wasn't a lonely widow inventing enemies because the house was too quiet. I'd found the name through my business network, a referral from a colleague who'd dealt with a corporate espionage case 3 years ago. If you ever need someone to find what people are hiding, she'd told me, call Garrett Hayes, XLAPD. 12 years on the Force 15 in private investigation. He's expensive, but he's the best. I dialed the number. Hayes Investigations. Mr. Hayes, my name is Ashley Mitchell. I need to hire you for a very sensitive matter. What kind of matter? The kind that involves my daughter's safety and a son-in-law who is planning something I can't prove yet. A pause, longer than Thomas's. The pause of a man who'd heard this kind of call before and knew what it meant. Can we meet today? I can do 2 o'clock. I'll be there. I hung up and set the phone down on the kitchen island. The coffee had gone cold. The sunrise had climbed above the tree line, filling the kitchen with the kind of warm, ordinary light that made the horrors of the previous night feel almost dreamlike. Almost. I poured the coffee down the sink and made a fresh pot. Then I went upstairs, showered, dressed in something that didn't look like I'd been awake all night, and drove to Thomas Barrett's office. Barrett and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in the financial district. I'd been coming here for 2 decades, but that morning the elevator ride felt longer than usual. Each passing floor gave me time to rehearse what I was going to say, and each passing floor made it sound more insane. The doors opened. Thomas's assistant looked up from her desk. Mrs. Mitchell, go right in. He's expecting you. Thomas stood by his window when I entered, phone pressed to his ear. He was 60, lean, precise, the kind of lawyer who wore his competence like a well-tailored suit. He ended the call when he saw me and set the phone down. Ashley, he crossed the room. You look terrible. I feel terrible. Sit down. He gestured to the leather chairs near his desk. Tell me. Will arrived 2 minutes later, slightly out of breath, still in yesterday's clothes. He took the chair beside me without a word. I told them everything. The rooftop, Nina Reeves, the back stairwell, the storage closet. Every word I'd heard Ethan say, and every word Harper had answered. I told it slowly, precisely the way I'd tell a board of directors about a failing project, facts first, emotions later. When I finished, neither of them spoke for a long moment. You're certain, Thomas said. It wasn't a question. I'm certain. He returned to his desk and opened his laptop. I need to review everything. Estate documents, insurance policies, trust succession plans. Every piece of paper Ethan Graves has touched. That's why I'm here. 20 minutes later, we sat across from each other with a stack of documents between us. Thomas had printed everything and pulled up digital records on his screen. Will stood at the window, arms crossed, listening. Let's start with life insurance, Thomas said. He slid a document toward me. I recognized it immediately, the policy I'd updated 6 months ago at Ethan's suggestion. $10 million policy, Thomas said. Primary beneficiary Michelle Mitchell. He pointed to a line near the bottom. But 6 months ago, you added a secondary beneficiary. I read the name. Ethan Graves, $6 million. Payable if both Ashley Mitchell and Michelle Mitchell were deceased. My stomach dropped. I stopped. I had. He suggested it. He said it was standard. Said it would protect Michelle and the family if anything happened. And you trusted him. Yes. Thomas made a note and pulled up another document. Next, the trust. The Mitchell Family Trust. $10 million established when Michelle turned 25, locked until she turned 35 or got married. She got married yesterday, Thomas said quietly. Which means the trust unlocked this morning. Michelle now has full access, and as her legal spouse Ethan has rights under California community property law. I felt Will shift behind me. He came to stand beside the desk, reading over Thomas's shoulder. There's more, Thomas said, opening another file. Your corporate succession plan. If you die, Michelle inherits your controlling shares in Mitchell Holdings. That was always the arrangement. Yes. But 4 months ago, you added a clause. He turned the screen toward me. If Michelle inherits and subsequently dies within 5 years, Her shares transfer to her surviving spouse. The room tilted. Ethan suggested that too, I said. My voice sounded far away. He said it was standard estate protection. If you die, Thomas said slowly, and then Michelle dies, Ethan Graves inherits controlling interest in a company worth $47 million. Will cursed softly behind me. I'd never heard him curse before. When did Ethan first contact you directly? I asked Thomas. He checked his calendar. February, 8 months ago. He said he wanted to discuss estate planning as Michelle's future husband. I thought it was responsible. What did he ask about? At first, normal things. Then he asked what would happen if you became incapacitated. Who would make medical decisions? Who would control assets? Incapacitated. I stood and walked to the window. 15 floors below, people moved through their Sunday mornings, walking dogs, carrying coffee, living ordinary lives. None of them knew that a mother was standing in a law office learning that every legal safeguard she'd built to protect her daughter had been turned into a weapon aimed at her daughter's heart. He's been setting this up for months, I said. Systematically, Thomas confirmed. Every change he suggested was individually reasonable. Taken together, they create a single path. You die. Michelle inherits, Michelle dies. Ethan inherits everything. Can we change it today? Thomas exchanged a look with Will. We can, but any change triggers automatic notifications. Ethan would know within 24 hours. And if he knows, he might accelerate whatever he's planning, or turn Michelle against you, or both. I closed my eyes, pressed my forehead against the cool glass. Then we leave it, I said. For now, we don't change anything until we have proof. I agree, Will said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the anger underneath. Will Dawson didn't get angry often. When he did, it was the quiet kind, the kind that meant someone had made a very serious mistake. I left Thomas's office with copies of every document Ethan Graves had influenced. 43 pages. The paper trail of a man building a cage around my family, one clause at a time. The corner cafe where I met Garrett Hayes sat on a quiet street 3 blocks from the financial district. It was the kind of place business people used for conversations they didn't want overheard. High-backed booths, ambient noise from the espresso machine staff who knew not to linger. I arrived 10 minutes early and took a booth in the back corner. The waitress brought coffee without asking. I wrapped my hands around the mug and waited. Garrett Hayes walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. He was mid-40s, solidly built with the kind of face that had seen things and filed them away for later. Short brown hair going gray at the temples. Eyes that moved once around the room, quick, thorough professional before landing on me. Ashley Mitchell, Garrett Hayes. We shook hands. His grip was firm and brief. He slid into the booth across from me and declined the waitress's offer of coffee. Tell me what you know, he said. No small talk, no pleasantries. I liked that. I told him everything, the wedding Nina's warning, the storage closet, the conversation I'd overheard, the meeting with Thomas Barrett, and the documents we'd reviewed. I laid it out the way I'd lay out a construction project foundation first, then framework, then the details that held it all together. Garrett listened without interrupting. He didn't take notes, didn't pull out a phone or recorder, just listened with the focused attention of someone trained to hear what people weren't saying as much as what they were. When I finished, he sat back and studied me for a long moment. You've been in business 40 years, he said. 42, and you're successful, very successful. I've done well, which means you have good instincts. He leaned forward slightly. You know when something doesn't add up. Those instincts have kept you alive in a world where one bad deal can ruin everything. I nodded. So when those same instincts tell you something's wrong with your son-in-law, trust them. He paused. I've been doing this work for 15 years. Before that, LAPD for 12. I've seen hundreds of cases like this. Financial predators who target families, build trust, position themselves, then strike. You know what they all have in common? What the family members always say the same thing afterward. I knew something was off, but I didn't want to believe it. He met my eyes. You're different. You're believing it now, before it's too late. Something loosened in my chest. Not relief, not yet, but the feeling of being taken seriously, of having someone look at the evidence and not tell me I was imagining things. Garrett pulled out a small notepad. Investigation scope, he said. First, Ethan Graves' background. Employment history, credit reports, criminal record, past relationships, bankruptcies, lawsuits. Everything going back 10 years. Good. Second, Harper Reed, financial records, communications with Ethan, how deep she's in and when it started. Yes. Third, surveillance. I put eyes on Ethan. Where he goes, who he meets, what he does when he thinks nobody's watching. And digital? I asked. He nodded. Fourth, digital forensics. If Ethan's planning something, there's a trail. Search history, emails, financial transactions. I have a specialist. Legal methods only. How long? Preliminary findings by Wednesday. Full investigation, the kind that builds an airtight case, could take weeks. I don't know if we have weeks. Then we prioritize the immediate threat, Garrett said. Evidence of imminent danger. Anything that shows Ethan or Harper planning something specific in the near term. He set the notepad down and reached into his jacket. Pulled out something that looked like a silver ballpoint pen. He slid it across the table. Recording device, he said. Voice activated. Legal in California under one-party consent. As long as you're part of the conversation, you can record without the other person's knowledge. I picked it up. It was heavier than a normal pen. Solid. Real. You want me to record Ethan? I want you to record everything. Shirt pocket. Click once to activate, twice to deactivate. If he says anything about his plans about Michelle, about you, we need it on record. I slipped it into my purse. Anything else? One more thing. His voice dropped, serious in a way that made the air in the booth feel thinner. Men like Ethan, when they feel cornered, they escalate. Fast. If he figures out you're investigating him, he won't retreat. He'll push harder. You need to be very careful. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't a business negotiation. This is a man who has spent 18 months building a trap for your family. If he thinks that trap is compromised, he'll act and he won't be gentle about it. I held his gaze. I built a $47 million company by walking onto construction sites where every man in the room thought I didn't belong. I've been threatened by contractors, underestimated by bankers, and told to go home and let the men handle it more times than I can count. I'm still here. They're not. Garrett studied me for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but something close. Respect, maybe. Fair enough, he said. One last question. Does your daughter know any of this? No. Keep it that way. If you go to her now with suspicions, Ethan will turn her against you. He's had 18 months to build trust. You'll be fighting uphill against everything she feels for him. I know. We'll get the evidence, Garrett said. And when we do, she'll see the truth. We discussed the retainer, $5,000, which I transferred before we left the booth. He gave me his card and told me to call any time, day or night. As we stood to leave, he paused. Mrs. Mitchell. Ashley. Ashley, he nodded. The woman at the wedding. Nina Reeves. She took a real risk warning you. Most people in her position would have looked the other way. She didn't. I know. Hold on to her number. People like that are rare. He walked out through the front entrance. I watched him go, efficient, unhurried, already working. Then I pulled out my phone. A text from Michelle. Mom, we're back from the mini honeymoon. Maldives trip is next month, but we did a quick weekend in Napa. It was amazing. Miss you so much. Can we do dinner this week? Thursday or Friday? I stared at the screen. My daughter. Happy, excited, completely unaware that the man sleeping beside her was the same man who'd called her useful for now, 2 nights ago. My thumbs trembled as I typed. Thursday won't work, sweetheart. I have meetings. How about next week? I want to hear everything about the trip properly. The response came in seconds. Okay, love you, Mom. I locked the phone and pressed it against my chest. Then I got in my car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home to wait for Garrett Hayes to uncover what Ethan Graves had been hiding. The email arrived at 3:47 p.m. on Wednesday. I was sitting in my home office, refreshing my inbox every 30 seconds, like a woman waiting for test results she didn't want to see. When Garrett's name appeared in bold, my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I had to put my hand on the desk to steady myself. Subject line: preliminary findings. Confidential. Password protected attachment. I typed in the code we'd agreed on. The document opened. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I pushed back from the desk and walked to the window because I needed to look at something, anything that wasn't the words on that screen. But the words followed me. They were inside me now. and they changed everything. Ethan Graves was born in Chicago to an upper-middle-class family. His father owned a regional construction supply company. His mother was a school administrator. Normal, respectable. The kind of family that sends Christmas cards with everyone in matching sweaters. Then 2008 happened. The recession gutted his father's business. Bankruptcy. 6 months later, his father died by suicide. Ethan was 22. 2 years after that, his mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. She died within the year. By 24, Ethan Graves was alone, traumatized, and according to Garrett's report, absolutely determined to never be vulnerable again. The financial picture was catastrophic. $320,000 in debt, student loans from an MBA program he'd never finished, credit card balances across 7 different cards, and gambling losses documented through casino records and online betting platforms. He'd built this mountain of debt while presenting himself to the world as a successful independent financial advisor. The man had no clients, no income, no assets. His entire life was a performance, an elaborately constructed lie, held together by charm and the willingness to deceive anyone who got close enough to believe him. But that wasn't what made me stand up and walk away from the computer. Garrett had traced offshore accounts in Ethan's name. Cayman Islands. Suspicious transfers totaling approximately $180,000 over the past 2 years, the source unclear. But 2 recent transactions stood out like blood on white linen. $20,000 to Harper Reed's personal checking account. 16 months ago, 1 month before she coincidentally introduced Ethan to Michelle at a charity gala. $100,000 to Harper Reed's personal checking account. 2 months ago, 1 week before she helped Michelle pick out bridesmaid dresses. My niece had been paid to deliver my daughter to a predator. The first installment bought the introduction. The second bought her continued silence and cooperation. Harper's financial records were almost as ugly as Ethan's. $280,000 in debt. Student loans, credit cards, a defaulted business loan from a failed real estate venture. Her income as an agent wasn't enough to cover the interest payments. She'd been facing bankruptcy when Ethan resurfaced in her life. They dated 5 years ago before any of this. A brief, volatile relationship that ended badly. Then, 18 months ago, Ethan reconnected with her. And suddenly Harper had money. And Ethan had access to the Mitchell family. But the part that made my blood go cold, the part that turned this from a financial scheme into something far more dangerous, was buried on page 11. Garrett had found another woman, Samantha Keller, 31 years old, daughter of a tech executive worth $200 million. She'd dated Ethan for 4 months in 2018. Samantha told Garrett's investigator that Ethan had been charming, attentive, utterly convincing. Then he'd started asking about her trust fund, how it was structured, who controlled it, what would happen if something happened to her father. When she caught him trying to forge her signature on power of attorney documents, she confronted him. He denied it, then broke down crying, said he was desperate, needed help. She hadn't pressed charges because she felt sorry for him. But Samantha had told Garrett something else, something she'd never told anyone before. After Ethan, there had been another woman, Rebecca Whitfield, 28, daughter of a hotel chain owner in San Diego. She'd dated Ethan for 8 months in 2020. Rebecca died in a single car accident 3 months after they broke up. Her car went off a mountain road. No witnesses, no mechanical defect found. The police ruled it accidental. Samantha's voice, as Garrett transcribed it, "I don't have proof, but Rebecca was an excellent driver. She knew those roads. And Ethan was furious when she ended things. I've thought about it every day for 5 years. I just never had anyone to tell." I stood in front of the window, staring at the estate grounds without seeing them. This wasn't just fraud. There was a dead woman. And my daughter had just married the man who might have killed her. I picked up my phone and called Garrett. I read it. "I know." His voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone accustomed to delivering terrible news. "I've already started pulling everything I can find on Rebecca Whitfield. Accident report, police investigation, insurance claims. If Ethan was involved, there'll be something." "How long?" "A few days, maybe a week." "Garrett." My voice caught. I forced it steady. "My daughter is living with him, right now, tonight. He's sleeping next to her." "I know. If he did what Samantha thinks he did." "Ashley." His voice sharpened, just enough to cut through my rising panic. "Listen to me. Right now, Ethan thinks he's winning. He thinks you're a grieving widow who's too grateful for a son-in-law to ask hard questions. That's our advantage. The moment he feels threatened, he becomes dangerous. So we don't threaten him. We don't tip him off. We keep building the case. And when we have enough, we take him down so hard he never gets back up. And Michelle is safer right now than she would be if Ethan knew we were coming. He has no reason to hurt her yet. She's his access point. He needs her. For now, I thought. He needs her for now. There's something else, Garrett said. The timeline. He laid it out, and hearing it in sequence, hearing the architecture of Ethan's plan was like watching a building go up in reverse, and realizing every beam was placed to collapse on one person. 18 months ago, Ethan and Harper reconnect. He pays her $20,000. She arranges the accidental meeting at the charity gala. 15 months ago, Ethan meets Michelle. Harper is there making the introduction feel natural and organic. 12 months ago, Ethan and Michelle begin dating. He's attentive, romantic, everything she's been looking for. 9 months ago, he proposes. Harper becomes maid of honor, eyes and ears, inside Michelle's life. 6 months ago, Ethan contacts Thomas Barrett. Gets himself added to the life insurance policy. Starts asking about incapacitation power of attorney medical decisions. 4 months ago, the succession clause. If Michelle inherits and dies, the surviving spouse gets everything. 2 months ago, Harper receives $100,000. And now Michelle is married. The trust fund is unlocked. The insurance is in place. Every legal domino has been set up in a perfect line. All Ethan has to do is push the first one. There's one more thing, Garrett said. His search history. My hand tightened on the phone. Tell me. He's been researching compounds that are difficult to detect in standard autopsies, methods for staging household accidents, California spousal inheritance timelines, emergency room response protocols. The kitchen was too bright. The sunlight was too warm. Everything was too normal for what I was hearing. He's Googled how to kill us, I said, and make it look natural. Yes. Garrett didn't soften it. I was grateful. Ashley, I want to be very clear about what we're dealing with. This man didn't meet your daughter and decide to take advantage of the situation. He identified your family as a target, constructed a plan, recruited an accomplice, and spent 18 months executing it. Michelle was never a person to him. She was a business plan, a $47 million business plan disguised as a love story. I sat down at the kitchen island. My legs weren't working right. And I walked her down the aisle, I whispered. I put her hand in his. I signed the documents that gave him everything he needed. You didn't know. I should have. Maybe. But you know now, and that's what matters. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder I'd set earlier that week, back when the world still made sense. Thursday, Michelle wants dinner. Below it, another reminder. Friday text from Ethan. Hey Ashley, Michelle told me about the dinner. I get it. You want to protect her. No hard feelings. Grab drinks Saturday. Just us. I stared at those words. He'd already sent this text 2 days ago, before I hired Garrett. Before I knew about Samantha Keller and Rebecca Whitfield and offshore accounts and forged documents, he'd invited me for drinks, just the two of us. Garrett, I said. Ethan wants to meet me Saturday evening. Drinks at a bar called The Anchor. Silence. Then, he knows Michelle told you about the dinner. He's probing, testing how much you know. Should I go? Yes. Wear the pen. I'll be nearby. And Ashley, what? Don't eat or drink anything he's touched. Saturday evening. The Anchor. The bar sat in the financial district dark wood leather booths, the kind of prices that separated serious drinkers from casual ones. I'd closed deals here back when Robert was alive. The bartenders knew my name. The hostess knew my booth. Tonight the familiar felt dangerous. I arrived at 7 exactly. Ethan was already seated in a corner booth, 2 glasses of amber liquid waiting on the table. He stood when he saw me. That smile. That effortless, beautiful, devastating smile that had fooled my daughter for 18 months and nearly fooled me forever. Ashley, thanks for coming. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. I know things have been tense. They have, I said, sliding into the booth across from him. The recording pen was in my shirt pocket, already activated. One click as I'd gotten out of the car. My heart was beating so hard I was certain he could hear it. 3 booths away, Will Dawson sat at the bar with a newspaper spread in front of him. His back was to us, but I could see his reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. He was watching. Garrett was in a car across the street, listening through the device. I was not alone. I repeated that to myself like a prayer. Ethan pushed one of the glasses toward me. Your favorite, Macallan 25. I thought we could clear the air properly. I looked at the glass. The whiskey was expensive, probably $60 a pour in a place like this, but it had been sitting there for a while. I could see the condensation on the outside of the glass, the slight separation of color at the surface where it had been exposed to air. He'd ordered it before I arrived. He'd had time alone with it. Garrett's voice echoed in my memory. Don't eat or drink anything he's touched. Actually, I said my stomach's been off all day. Probably shouldn't. Something moved across Ethan's face. Fast, like a shadow passing behind a window there and gone before you could identify it. Frustration, maybe anger, replaced instantly by warm concern. Come on, he said, picking up his own glass. Just one sip, for family. He raised his glass and waited. The social pressure was a physical weight. I could feel it pressing on my chest. In polite society, refusing a drink from your son-in-law at a reconciliation meeting was an act of aggression. He knew that. He was counting on it. If I refused, he'd know something was wrong. If I drank from a glass that had been sitting here before I arrived, a glass I hadn't watched being poured, I picked up the glass, brought it to my lips, let the rim touch my mouth, and tilted the glass just enough to look natural while keeping the liquid from entering my mouth. I set it down. There. Ethan's eyes narrowed, just slightly, like a camera adjusting focus. You didn't actually drink, he said. I saw. My pulse spiked. I did. No, you didn't. His smile stayed in place, but the warmth had shifted. Something harder underneath. Come on, Ashley. One real sip. We're trying to move forward here. There was no graceful exit. Refusing again would confirm whatever suspicion was forming behind those blue-gray eyes. I needed him relaxed. I needed him talking. I needed whatever was on this recording to be usable. I took a sip, the smallest I could manage without making it obvious. The Macallan hit my tongue smoky-rich peaty, and underneath it, something else, something that didn't belong. Bitter, chemical, wrong. I swallowed, set the glass down, kept my face neutral. Happy, I said, very. Ethan took a long drink from his own glass, watching me over the rim. Now, about this private investigator business. I felt it almost immediately, heat spreading through my chest like someone had lit a match behind my sternum. My heartbeat, already fast from adrenaline, began to accelerate beyond what adrenaline could explain. A fine layer of sweat broke across my forehead. Ethan was talking. Something about insurance changes being standard, about wanting to protect Michelle's interests, about how much he loved my daughter. His voice was smooth and reasonable and utterly convincing, and I wasn't hearing any of it, because the room was starting to move. Not spin, not yet, but the edges were softening. The hard lines of the booth, the bottles behind the bar, the sharp geometry of Ethan's jaw. Everything was losing focus like a photograph slowly going out of resolution. You okay? Ethan asked, leaning forward. You look flushed. Just warm in here. Have another sip. It'll help you relax. I'm fine, but he kept circling back. The whiskey. Another sip. You've barely touched it. Relax, Ashley. Enjoy the evening. Every few minutes, the glass reappeared in the conversation, like a recurring note in a song he'd composed specifically for this moment. And eventually, because I needed to maintain the illusion, because I couldn't let him see what I already knew, I took another small sip. That was a mistake. The heat in my chest became a fire. My heart was hammering now, slamming against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples and the tips of my fingers. Sweat soaked through the back of my blouse. The room wasn't softening anymore. It was tilting, sliding sideways like a ship taking on water. I gripped the edge of the table. Ethan was still talking, his mouth moving, words coming out, but they turned into sound without meaning, just shapes in the air that dissolved before I could catch them. Ashley, his voice sharpened, concerned, perfectly beautifully concerned. You don't look well. Should I call someone? Restroom? I managed. I tried to stand, my legs folded. Not dramatically, not a collapse, just a sudden terrifying absence of strength, like someone had removed the bones from my lower body. I caught myself on the table's edge, then the wall, and I made it 3 steps toward the bathroom before a hand closed around my arm. I've got you. Will's voice, low, steady, close. He walked me to the restroom. I barely made it to a stall before everything came up violent, wrenching my body trying to expel whatever Ethan had put in that glass. Will stood outside the door, keeping watch. When I emerged gray-faced and shaking, he was pale too. But his jaw was set in that way I'd seen exactly 3 times in 30 years of friendship, the way that meant someone had crossed a line Will Dawson would not forgive. What happened? He asked. The drink. He put something in it. Jesus Christ. We need to get you to a hospital. Now. The glass, I said. My voice was barely there. We need the glass. Evidence. Forget the glass. You need Will. I grabbed his arm. My fingers were shaking so badly I could barely hold on. Get the glass, please. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the bar. I leaned against the wall. My reflection stared back at me from the bathroom mirror. Gray skin, dilated pupils, lips tinged with something that wasn't the right color. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who'd been poisoned by her son-in-law over expensive whiskey. When I came out of the bathroom, Ethan was standing near our booth. His face was arranged in concern. Perfect concern. The kind of concern that would fool paramedics and doctors and police officers, and everyone except the woman who'd heard him in a hallway 2 weeks ago calling her daughter useful. Ashley, you don't look good at all. Should I call an ambulance? No. The word came out harder than I intended. Will's going to drive me home. Food poisoning. Something I ate earlier. Are you sure you really don't look? I'm fine. Will appeared with his jacket bundled under his arm. I could tell from the shape that the glass was wrapped inside it. He put his hand under my elbow, gentle, firm. Let's go, he said. We made it to the parking lot before my legs gave out completely. I collapsed against the side of Will's car, the concrete cold through my dress, the night air sharp in my lungs, but not sharp enough to cut through the fog that was closing in from all sides. Will already had his phone out. I'm calling 911. No. Ashley, you've been poisoned. We're going to the hospital and we're calling the police. This isn't negotiable. I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't form. My mouth wasn't working right. The parking lot lights were halos, now soft, bright, pulsing with my heartbeat. I heard Will on the phone, heard him give the address, heard him say possible poisoning, and we have the glass, and please hurry. Through the haze, through the tilting, swimming darkness that was swallowing the edges of the world, I turned my head toward the bar's entrance. Through the window I could see Ethan, still sitting in our booth. He hadn't followed us out, hadn't rushed to help, hadn't called 911 himself. He was just sitting there perfectly still, watching me through the glass the way you'd watch a stock ticker at the end of a trading day. Our eyes met, and he smiled. Not the charming smile, not the warm smile, not the smile he used on Michelle or business associates, or the woman he'd married into a $47 million trap. This was the other smile, the real one, the one he wore when he was alone in a hallway adjusting his tie when there was no audience to perform for and no mask to maintain. Cold, satisfied, patient, the smile of a man watching something die on schedule. The ambulance arrived with sirens. As the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, I kept my eyes on that window. On Ethan Graves, sitting alone with his whiskey, watching me being loaded into an ambulance the way you'd watch a sunset, with calm appreciation for something going exactly as planned. He raised his glass, a small private toast. Then the ambulance doors closed and I couldn't see him anymore. I woke to the sound of machines and the smell of things that weren't alive. Disinfectant, plastic tubing, the metallic recycled air that all hospitals share regardless of how much they charge per night. For a confused moment I didn't know where I was. The ceiling was wrong. The light was wrong. Everything was too white, too bright, too sharp. Then the memories flooded back. The bar, the whiskey, the bitter chemical taste. Ethan's smile through the glass. Mom! Michelle's face appeared above me, tear-streaked, swollen. She grabbed my hand so hard I felt the bones shift. You scared me to death, she said. They said you were poisoned. If Will hadn't called 911, her voice broke. I'm okay, I managed. The words came out dry, cracked, but they came. The door opened. A woman in a white coat entered, checking monitors with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Dr. Lauren Price, mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, The kind of face that delivered bad news well because it didn't flinch. "Mrs. Mitchell, welcome back." She pulled up a stool beside the bed. "Your preliminary toxicology results show compounds in your system that aren't consistent with food poisoning or anything you'd encounter through normal ingestion. These are synthetic." Michelle looked between us. "What does that mean?" Dr. Price chose her words with surgical precision. "It means this wasn't accidental. We're required to report these findings to the authorities. A detective will be in contact." She checked my IV, made a note on her tablet, and left. The door clicked shut behind her, and the room became very small and very quiet. Michelle turned to me. Her eyes were red, but something behind the tears had changed, hardened. "Mom, who were you with tonight?" I could have lied. Could have bought another day, another week of pretending. But I looked at my daughter's face, the fear, the confusion, the desperate need for an answer that made sense, and I knew the time for protecting her from the truth was over. "I was having drinks with Ethan." Silence. Not the kind of silence where someone is thinking of what to say, the kind where someone is rewriting everything they thought they knew. "You got sick," Michelle said slowly, "after having drinks with Ethan." "Yes." "Did he—" She stopped, started again. "Was he—" "Michelle, I need to tell you everything, and I need you to listen all the way through. Can you do that?" She sat down. Her hands were in her lap, fingers twisted together so tightly the knuckles were white. She nodded. So I told her. Everything. From the beginning. Nina Reeves on the rooftop. The storage closet. Every word I'd heard Ethan say, every word Harper had answered. Thomas Barrett's documents. The insurance policy, the trust fund, the succession clause. Hiring Garrett Hayes. The investigation. Ethan's debts. The offshore accounts. Harper's payments. Samantha Keller. Rebecca Whitfield. The chemical purchases. The search history. The glass of Macallan 25 that was sitting on the table before I arrived. I told her all of it, and I watched her face change as I spoke. Not all at once. Slowly, layer by layer, like watching a photograph develop in reverse, the colors draining the brightness, fading until what was left was something stark and exposed and too painful to look at directly. When I finished, Michelle didn't speak. She sat in the hospital chair beside my bed, perfectly still, her hands still twisted in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on something I couldn't see, some middle distance where the life she thought she had was collapsing into the life she actually had. 1 minute passed. 2. "Michelle," I said softly. "Say something." "I told you Dad would be ashamed of you." The words came out flat. Not directed at me, directed at herself. At the version of herself who'd stood in my kitchen a week ago and said those words while I was trying to save her life. "I said you were jealous, that you couldn't stand me being happy, that you were trying to sabotage my marriage because you were lonely. You didn't know. You were trying to warn me." Her voice cracked. "And I told you Dad would be ashamed. Michelle, is it all true, everything? Garrett has the documents, the financial records, camera footage from tonight's bar showing Ethan arriving 20 minutes early and doing something to the glass," Michelle finished. Her voice was hollow. "He put something in your drink. While you were driving to meet him, he was putting poison in your whiskey." "Yes." She stood up, walked to the window, pressed both palms against the glass like she needed something solid to hold her up. "I loved him," she said. So quiet I almost didn't hear it. "I actually loved him. You loved who you thought he was. He told me he loved me every morning, every single morning. He'd bring me coffee in bed and say—" She stopped, pressed her forehead against the glass. "Was any of it real?" I didn't answer, because the answer was no, and she already knew, and saying it aloud would only make it worse. She stood at that window for a long time. I watched her shoulders rise and fall, watched her hands press harder against the glass and then release, watched the trembling start and start again. When she finally turned around, her eyes were dry. Not calm, something beyond calm, something that had passed through grief and come out the other side into a cold, clear place. "What do we do?" A knock at the door. Before either of us could answer, it opened. Ethan walked in carrying flowers. White lilies, Michelle's favorite. His face was arranged in exactly the right configuration of worry and relief, furrowed brow, soft eyes, the slight downturn of the mouth that said, "I've been so scared." He stopped 2 steps inside the door. His eyes moved across the room. Me sitting up in bed more alert than he'd expected. Michelle standing by the window, not crying, not rushing to him, just standing there with her arms at her sides. For one fraction of a second, so brief that if you weren't watching for it, you'd miss it entirely. Something passed across Ethan Graves's face. I saw it. Michelle saw it. It was disappointment. Raw, undisguised, involuntary disappointment. The micro-expression of a man who'd walked into a room expecting a corpse and found a conversation instead. Then it was gone, buried under layers of practiced warmth. Ashley, thank God you're all right. He set the flowers on the side table and moved toward the bed. They told me it was food poisoning. I was so worried. That's kind of you, Ethan. Michelle, honey. He turned to her, opening his arms. Are you okay? I came as soon as I heard. Michelle didn't move, didn't step into the hug. She stood by the window with her arms at her sides and looked at her husband with eyes I'd never seen on her before. Not angry, not sad, evaluating. Why didn't you call me? She asked. When Mom got sick at the bar, Will called 911. The hospital called me. But you never called. A hairline crack in the performance. So small you'd need a microscope to see it. But it was there. I didn't want to worry you until I knew what was going on, Ethan said smoothly. I thought it was just a bad reaction to something she ate. By the time I realized it was serious, the ambulance was already there. You were sitting at the table when the paramedics came, I said. You didn't come outside. I didn't want to get in the way. The professionals, you watched through the window, I continued. I saw you. Another crack. His smile thinned. I was worried, Ashley. I was in shock. People react differently to stressful situations. Of course, I said. Of course they do. The room was quiet. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Ethan stood between the bed and the window between wife and mother-in-law, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw uncertainty on his face. Not guilt uncertainty, the uncertainty of a chess player who's noticed pieces on the board that weren't there at the beginning of the game. I should let you rest, he said. I'll come back in the morning. You don't need to, Michelle said. He looked at her. Honey, I'm staying here tonight with Mom. You go home. Something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, adjustment. Okay, if that's what you want. He kissed the air near Michelle's cheek. She didn't lean in and squeezed my hand. Feel better, Ashley. We need you around for a long time. He left. The door closed softly behind him. His footsteps faded down the corridor. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. He was disappointed, Michelle said. She was still looking at the closed door. When he walked in and saw you sitting up, talking, alive, she turned to me. He was disappointed that you were alive, Mom. Yes. I saw it. I know. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of my bed, took my hand. Her grip was fierce, the grip of someone holding on to the last solid thing in a world that had just liquefied. Tell me what to do, she said. Tell me what we do next. I squeezed her hand. First we call Garrett Hayes. Then we call a detective named Rachel Holloway. And then I looked at my daughter, 29 years old, the strongest person I knew, and she didn't even realize it yet. And then we take him apart.